Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of MITA's Deep Dive Express modules. My name is Caleb Tice. We also have our leader here, Dimitri Downing, and we're fortunate to have Mr. Prescott Jones, attorney with Resnick and Lewis, to come and talk to us about a very, very important topic when it comes to your licenses, and that is, what are all of the steps after you've gotten that lucky lottery ball and want to get to the point where you are opening the doors? So there are a lot of things that are involved in there. And we're going to cover all of that here today. So Prescott, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to all of those viewing out there.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Dimitri. I certainly, first of all, appreciate the time that you're allowing me to have and to be a part of this program, which is, great for certainly our industry, but great for the community as well. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a partner with Resnick and Lewis. I'm out here in Las Vegas. I head our firm's cannabis practice group. I've been involved in the cannabis industry in Nevada since its very beginning. And sometimes, we call that the dark ages out here because it was a simple, the fact of the situation we're in is we had to unfortunately have a criminal practice group alongside of our cannabis practice group because raids were common, local municipalities arresting license holders was common. And I'm thankful every day that the industry has progressed to the point that it has now, in no small part to the efforts of certainly you guys, our trade associations, our license holders, and fortunately our legislatures as well. So thank you for the opportunity, and certainly looking forward to hopefully providing everyone some pretty useful information today.
Thank you, Prescott. Yeah, it's a different world in the last decade from when we got started in the industry in Arizona's inception, 2011, 2012. It feels like a lot longer than 10 years ago, just in how the reception of landlords, from the reception of legislature, any of the regulatory agencies that you have to work with in addition to the Cannabis Authority. It just seems everyone's perspective has changed. What do you think some of the things that have contributed to that change in perspective?
Well, I think the biggest thing we've seen is perhaps maybe it starts at the top. I think you started to see a little bit of softening from the feds when it came to, I think it started with the Department of Justice. There were some memorandums that were issued back in the early days, which kind of started to pave the way a little bit for some of the reforms we see now, some softening at the top, if you will, and gradually. And, I think we can kind of all agree once the state tax department started to see some of the revenues coming in from the early adoption states like California and Oregon and the like. Money talks. That's just the world we live in sometimes. And I think that helped quite a bit. And I think that kickstarted really people starting to realize that maybe cannabis isn't this big harmful drug that's going to, ruin society. And in fact, it's even healthier than alcohol in many ways. So I think it's a continuing evolution, but the progress has been consistent. It's ongoing. And I think, fingers crossed, one day we'll see it legalized at the national level.
Prescott, you mentioned the memorandum. I haven't talked or heard about the Cole memorandum in like 5 or 6 years. And that's so important that you remember that. You go back to the old school, original days. So that definitely establishes your credibility in the space.
Yeah, times have changed quite a bit since then, haven't they, Dimitri?
Yes, definitely. I remember the Cole memorandum. What was the other memorandum?
Yep. So it's ultimately the dollars that do it. So I'm up here in Oregon, and I had an opportunity to speak with some state legislatures up here about their program, and there's a big social equity push that's happening up here as well, and it has to do with all of the tax revenues that throughout the pandemic, actually, the cannabis industry was one of the few that was actually providing consistent funds for the government to be able to continue operating, which it put a big smile on my face of knowing where things have come. And I really, the goal here today, well, of course, as you really touched on, in the past, there was enforcement and raids and having to have that criminal aspect of something, right? As we've transitioned through that, there's been a lot of individuals that have been adversely impacted during the dark ages. I really actually like that term. I'm probably going to steal that from you, man. To now we're at the point where the industry has an opportunity to be able to give back and to try to rectify some of those wrongs that have happened. And that's through, of course, the social equity programs that have been developed in each state and that we're continuing to see. So from a Nevada perspective, or who are the social equity licenses for?
Well, we don't, unfortunately, we don't have a social equity program in Nevada, and it's not something that's been really discussed at this point in time. I'm obviously, we have a fantastic office of cannabis attorneys in Scottsdale, and I'm is the leader of our practice group here. I'm intimately involved with them, and I know you guys have touched quite a bit on the regulations that have come out in draft form recently, and I'm certainly not here to talk for an hour about that. But the draft regulations are it's a start. The regulations are fairly simple in the requirements. There's an income limitation. There's a requirement for some past either a conviction or a record related to the cannabis to a cannabis offense, and I think that goes a long way, certainly, in trying to rectify some of the issues that came out of the dark ages of cannabis, or certainly even before that, before anything was legalized, either on the state or the federal level. But I'm not sure where it's going to go down the road, but it certainly, I think, goes a long way towards helping rectify some of those past issues.
Definitely. So you touched on with your Scottsdale offices and being intimately involved there. So what are some of the candidates in Arizona, like some of the backgrounds of those that have been reaching out to you, to your firm, and inquiring about either expungement, because I know that that's a big piece of it, or just related to eligibility on the licenses? Like what sort of questions and things have you been asked?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, eligibility is the biggest thing that we get asked on a regular basis. And quite frankly, based on what we've seen before, we're surprised in the simplicity of it all. Other states, I believe Oregon is certainly a state that has more requirements than Arizona has had so far. So the eligibility requirements are fairly simple. The biggest issue that we ran into is sort of the income requirement, that you have to be below what's essentially double the federal poverty level for 2019. But at least at some point during the formation of the draft regulations, there was a capital requirement that's now gone. There's an initial license fee, which was quite substantial, which has been, my understanding, almost entirely eliminated, or is in the process of going down to zero. So that's been obviously helpful. I mean, the common sense, I think, has taken over, thankfully, that you can't require people to pay $50,000 for a license, but also require that they don't make more than $50,000 for a married couple, $25,000 for an individual. So that's been, refreshing to see some common sense.
Something's a little bit off there.
Yeah,
for sure.
certainly.
For sure. So, what about in like what kind of businesses within the industry? Let's say you get a license. Like, what does it let you do? What sort of operations are you able to do at that point?
Sure. Everyone wants the dispensary license, right? Because that's the people think, at least, that come and talk to me, talk to my partners in the Scottsdale office. They want the dispensary because that's they think it's the money printing machine. And once you sit down and talk to the prospective clients and explain the process, which we're going to talk about a bit more today, it becomes real to people, because there's a lot of work between the time that you get awarded the license and the 18 months you have to get up and running by that time. We'll talk a little bit more about that today, but you start to realize that you need to get some investment, probably bring in some partners, that sort of thing. And the Arizona regulations, as currently drafted, are helpful in that regard, because the social equity component of the license holder only needs to maintain, as of now, 51% interest in the entity that's formed that owns the dispensary. So it does allow for some outside investment, which is extremely helpful, while still requiring the social equity license holder to be a majority owner in the company, which provides obviously a lot of the benefits to that. So that's certainly a good sign.
You have to create that mechanism to be able to, if you're going to restrict income requirements, then where's the capital to be able to build the business out? I mean, that's and there's a lot that goes into that. So, and we mentioned legal a few different times. I mean, at what point in the stage, in the planning, in the development, should applicants engage legal? Like, when does it make sense?
It's not going to be a surprise coming from an attorney like myself, but I would advise anyone who gets a license, anyone who's even thinking about applying for a license, to immediately engage an attorney. And here's why. If you go look at the regulations in any state, in my state in Nevada, if you Google Nevada cannabis law, the first thing that's going to come up is our Nevada revised statute, which is essentially the initial framework that was provided when medical and later recreational was allowed. But that's only the start of the process. You have our Nevada Administrative Code. You have our Cannabis Compliance Board regulations. And these regulations change, it seems like on a daily basis, even though it's not really daily, but they change all the time. And you have to have someone like myself, my partners, or whatever attorney you end up going with ultimately. You have to have someone who stays on top of that, who attends continuing education, who speaks on the topics, who's intimately familiar with it to help guide you. And that's, unfortunately, the cannabis regulations are just scratching the surface of all the regulations you're going to have to deal with as a license holder. And we'll talk a little bit more about those, I think, pretty soon, but that's just really where it starts. And the unfortunate reality of being in the world that we're in is that if you make one bad step, even early on, you may disqualify yourself from opening a dispensary. And unfortunately, I've seen governments have no problem pulling a license, selling it to another person, transferring it to someone else who's going to comply with those requirements. So that's why I always advise clients, engage with an attorney the second you even really think about being serious about going after a license.
Yep. It definitely makes sense on those changing regulations. I mean, we've seen it in Arizona already with the testing regulations. That just gives a great example of how things can change, how they've evolved, how even in just from November to May to now, we've had 3 versions of them that have come. So it's always, and if you're ever not sure, we're in a compliance-driven environment that, I mean, I think you hit on it. By not knowing and making assumptions, you could lose your license. So it's always important that you understand and you have the competent professionals to be able to be part of your team.
Exactly. And, if I can kind of build on that, I think a lot of us in the industry kind of look at these regulations as being inherently a bad thing. And let's not forget, the reason those regulations are there, the reason that we're starting to see a little bit broader acceptance of cannabis among, the entire population, and not just those of us who are involved in the industry. We want to make sure that our cannabis industry is regulated, that it's on the up and up, that it's professional, that the product you're buying is the product that is being displayed. And we've seen problems early on when cannabis was implemented, and that's the reason for these regulations. So a lot of times, those of us that are attorneys or in the industry look at regulations as a bad thing, but let's not forget the reason why they're there, certainly. And it gives us legitimacy, I think, in the eyes of maybe some of the skeptical.
Yep, I would 100% agree with you. It gives that framework, and not just from the skeptical. It's what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to operate? And there are protections that are built in there for both the consumer side, but also for the operators. I mean, you think of security requirements like, oh, I'm trying to keep people out. No, I'm trying to keep my individuals and my employees and everybody safe. And that's why those are there. I think that it can be a little Byzantine, and you just got to be able to navigate it. So, okay. So what we're here to talk about, and we're going to go through the process. So, we're going to do it from the Nevada perspective, is I've got a license. So an aspiring applicant has gone through the process. They pull together their team, they get their application in, they get one of those lottery balls, they're waiting there that day, and their number gets pulled. So what's next? What are the next steps? What do you have to do from that point?
Sure. First thing you should do.
With your attorney.
Yes. Celebrate and call your attorney. Absolutely.
It's a team meeting with the attorney.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead, sorry.
Because the term lottery is appropriate because this is a fantastically valuable asset that you just received. There's only, I think my recollection was there's only 26 in Arizona that are being awarded, and there's going to be a lot more than 26 applicants for this for the license. So congratulations, celebrate, and then call your attorney the next morning, because I'm going to tell you, the first thing you're going to do is incorporate. Incorporation is valuable because it takes away, especially in Nevada, but certainly Arizona. Arizona has very good corporate protection as well, but it takes away to a certain extent personal liability for you, the license holder, for certain things that go hand in hand with operating a business. And if you've never ran a business before, you're going to learn all the pitfalls of running a business and operating a business, employment issues, liability issues, slip and fall, contractual things, that sort of thing. And incorporation puts a step in between you as yourself, your personal bank accounts, your personal assets, and the business, which is hugely important. And it's going to get more and more important as we get through the process of setting up your license. So once you're incorporated, the next step that you're going to have to do, and let's keep in mind, in Arizona, if you get awarded a license, you have 18 months to get your business up and running. And 18 months seems like a long time, and it's longer than Nevada. Nevada gives you 1 year, but I'll tell you, once you start going through these steps, it is not a long time. And you need to really get the process started right away. Now, assuming you're going to run a dispensary, one of the first things you have to do is to locate an appropriate site, a piece of property. There's commercial real estate brokers all out there. We all, all of us as attorneys certainly have contacts that we've worked with before. We're always happy to, make a referral out to someone who knows the cannabis industry, knows the ins and outs of dealing with it. And perhaps the most important thing is, you mentioned before, Caleb, is finding a landlord who's okay with the idea of having a cannabis business at their property.
Yep.
It used to be a huge issue. No one wanted to touch out with the 10-foot pole. Now it's a little bit different now, obviously. Again, they see the money that comes into these kind of places. They see the foot traffic that they even generate, all very valuable to a landlord. So it's a little bit easier than it used to be, but it's something that you have to be very careful with and make sure you have the right professionals involved in. Now, after that, it's not as simple as finding a site and saying, I'm going to open up my cannabis business. In Nevada,
only it was that easy.
Yeah, right. Maybe that's the theme for today, right? It's not really as easy as it sounds. Maybe we should change the name of today's event. But in Nevada, you have to have a public meeting related to your location. And how that public meeting is going to work is going to vary based on jurisdiction. In Nevada, and specifically, I'm in Las Vegas, in Clark County in the Las Vegas Valley. It's a little bit different than in Arizona. We only have 3 formal jurisdictions. We have the city of Las Vegas, we have the city of Henderson, and the city of North Las Vegas. Everything else in the Las Vegas Valley, about 2/3 of it or so, is unincorporated and governed by the Clark County Commission. So you have to know wherever your property is, know your jurisdiction. Phoenix is different. There's a lot more municipalities there. Make sure you're aware, and this is something your attorney could find out within 5 minutes or less. If you give them an address, they'll be able to tell you what the jurisdiction is, tell you the appropriate governmental entity to go talk to. Hopefully if you pick a good attorney, they'll know some people over there when they give them a call and can hopefully expedite things for you. And kind of what goes hand in hand with that after you set up the public meeting is land use approval. You can't just start a dispensary out of your garage if you already own your own home or something like that. You have to make sure it's appropriately zoned, not just for commercial use, but if applicable, cannabis use. You have to make sure that you get that zoning part right. And this is something, it's not simply just rubber stamped by whatever jurisdiction you're in. It's going to be, sometimes it's contested. There's hearings a lot of times for these, and it's sort of an unfortunate maybe vestige of our industry is that, and I've seen it before out here, where if you go into a rich area and think this is great, the average median income is $125,000 within a mile of here. This is a great location. Well, sometimes people don't want cannabis dispensaries or retailers in their neighborhood, and they've successfully been able to convince their local governmental entity to reject the application simply because they don't want cannabis. Cannabis is legal on a state basis in Nevada and Arizona, but it's not required. Local governments do not have to give you your license wherever you want to operate. The right attorney can structure and present the dispensary to the government and to the public, the public meeting and the group of people that show up there the right way as best to maximize your chances of success in getting approval, but it's certainly not guaranteed. So you have to know your jurisdiction, and you have to make sure you have the right professionals helping you out.
Yep. So I want to touch on that just briefly before we move on about zoning municipalities and its exact same translation into Arizona of looking at the right zoning areas. There's typically is going to be a permitting process, and it's called a special use permit or a conditional use permit, where it's the same. You're going towards the commission. There's the opportunity for the public to be able to come and comment. And I've seen it in Arizona as well too, of either trying to get variances and or even just trying to get in a site where there still is a huge stigma out there, even more so than adult entertainment. So that is one thing just to keep in mind on your locations. Of that is a huge hurdle. It's still, even with the shift in the landlords, it is a huge hurdle, and it's going to ultimately decide your success. Your location, just like if the old adage in real estate, location, 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 it is going to determine your success as a business. So I can't stress enough how important it is of finding the right spot. And if you found a spot that you think works, but it's going to take some work with the local regulators, that's when you engage the professionals, either through legal. There's also companies that specialize in zoning and helping companies to get that. So just wanted to touch on that before we moved on.
Yeah, and certainly if you get hooked up with the right commercial real estate person, they'll be able to tell you everything about the specific area that you're looking at. If you're looking to target maybe a younger audience, if you're looking to target newer houses, it all depends on whatever your specific business plan is. But whatever you're looking for, a good commercial real estate person will help you target that audience and give you the best possible chance of getting that local zoning approval, getting you the best possible chance of avoiding that vocal group of homeowners who want cannabis nowhere near their poor children. So you really do have to work with the best professionals moving forward. And this is absolutely something you can't do on your own.
And, Caleb, Brian from Zone Properties, one of our META members, helps people find properties. But strategically speaking, I would encourage applicants to not get hung up too much on the location, because with proper counsel, rezoning is possible, and the locations will come after the lottery process.
Yeah, good point, Dimitri. There, you don't need a location in order to submit your application, but that also means you shouldn't be waiting to find some potentials and have your plan starting to be formulated beforehand. Because just like Prescott said, that 18 months, it's going to go quick. I had a year, and before we knew it, we blinked, 5 months had gone by, and we had to scramble to be able to get our place open.
Let's not forget too, each one of these steps are not sequential. You're going to be doing a number of these, if not all of these steps simultaneously. And when you're doing that, you're going to be stretched pretty thin and time is going to fly. So it's imperative that you get hooked up with the right professionals, you get a plan, and you get moving on that almost instantly, because like you said, that time will fly.
Definitely. So, all right. So we're at the point, we've gone through the approvals, the permitting. We now are able to, what's next? What happens after that?
Sure. So in Nevada, there's actually very few formal regulations other than those that we described just now. One of the things you have to do, it's a pretty easy one, is you have to make sure that you get a professional survey done to ensure compliance with regulations. Nevada, like almost all states, has requirements that you cannot be within X number of feet of a church, of a school, of a daycare, that sort of thing. And I'll tell you, those things are constantly evolving, and you want to make sure that you talk to your attorney and make sure what the current regulations are. Have that attorney work with the surveyor to make sure that they're not surveying the wrong distance or anything like that. All of these things that I just described, the survey, the land use approval, the local governmental authority approval, that's going to be put together in Nevada to get your actual cannabis license. And that's going to be submitted. And that's a process that's going to take some time. Now, it remains kind of unclear as to how that's going to play out in Arizona, because the last thing you want to do is be giving your application to the state on the 17th month, or halfway through the 18th month, or that sort of thing. These things take time. They're seemingly constantly underfunded. And you better believe with 26 new licenses being awarded at roughly the same time and having roughly the same deadline, you're going to be competing for the time of the board members with 25 other license holders to try to get done in those 18 months. So now's not the time for procrastination. You want to be one of the first, not one of the last, certainly. And
Sorry,
there's enough. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one quick component there. And this will go out towards the end of June, be watched anytime for the next 4 or 5 months. So people should definitely, again, consult with counsel, because in Arizona, and a lot of people don't know this at this point, the local jurisdictions are enacting or trying to enact specific social equity laws that apply to the licenses that are issued to social equity applicants. No one knows what's that going to end up like. But right now, for example, in the city of Tucson, there's hundreds of sites where you can put adult use licenses. Great, that's a wonderful thing. All 26 might end up there. But the city of Tucson put a moratorium in May on any social equity licenses being in the city of Tucson until they can figure out their qualifications. So that's like a mystery box that's yet to be opened. So depending on when you're watching this, if you want to go to the city of Tucson, you better make sure that you understand the local ordinances that they've come up with, which we don't even know what's popped out of the box yet.
Yeah, Dimitri, that's a great point, because one that really goes back to knowing your jurisdiction that you're looking to set a business in. Out in Nevada, I've had clients who've had conditional approvals on cannabis licenses in some of our rural counties that have had moratoriums in place for years. So, I mean, it's great you got the license. You can't do anything with it though. So it's important to know your jurisdiction, to keep tabs on, what's going on with that jurisdiction, the reasons for why they may have a moratorium, and you start thinking about maybe even lobbying efforts to get those laws over changed. And you can do that sometimes in the smaller jurisdictions. City of Tucson, a little bit bigger, obviously, maybe a little more difficult to do, but know your jurisdiction it's imperative in this business.
Yep.
Yeah,
And,
well,
and not
hopefully
just from the
they'll-
regulatory standpoint, but also just the business climate, knowing on how that jurisdiction, what is it like to operate a corner store in that jurisdiction, and then being able to translate that into what my operations may look like.
Yes, absolutely. It's probably one of the most important things we can talk about today is knowing your jurisdiction.
Yep. Okay, so there is going to be another application process. It's called an approval to operate application that is done after the license. So making sure on people in Arizona understanding, you get that first registration certificate, and then you go through those next steps, and then you apply to be able to operate. You have to remember that it's at the same department with 130 other licenses and other locations. I've had it upwards of 6 weeks on an inspection from when I submitted an application to when my site actually, they were able to have somebody come out. And that just that's just a numbers game. So that's also something more to your point, Prescott, of not waiting and thinking, oh, well, I'm at month 17, I'll be fine. Like you definitely want to make sure that you have a project plan, have dates, and kind of have that mapped out.
Yeah, certainly. And there's a number of things too you want to think about, because simply getting to that point in the process where you have everything submitted to the state, there's a lot between that and the actual day that you open. And I think maybe it's a good time to bring in some of the other things that we have to do that aren't formally a part a lot of times of the application process, but are things that you necessarily have to do anyway under some of the regulations, certainly in Nevada and Arizona as well. You have to have security in place. We all work with a number of security companies who are specialized in the cannabis industry, and it's imperative that you have the right security. I hate to say it, but there was a dispensary that opened up here maybe 4 or 5 years ago or so. They opened up on a Saturday. It was in an area that was fairly underserved, very, exciting, obviously, for all of us. That first night that they were in business, there was a robbery attempt on them because a lot of these guys know that the first day that a dispensary opens, sometimes their security might not be in place. They're going to have, certainly at that point in time, they're going to have a lot of cash in the building. That's just a reality that we have to live with in the cannabis industry, is that we're targets sometimes. So make sure you have your security in place. There's regulations that govern certainly, cameras within the building, tracking of employees, that sort of thing. That's, something we can talk about. And I could spend probably this entire hour talking about the various security requirements in Nevada, but you want to have security in place. Certainly you need to have insurance in place. Insurance is something that, again, if you've never ran a business before, insurance is probably one of the most important things you can have to protect yourself and to protect your business. Because again, when you have big dollar amounts that you deal with in a dispensary, you're a target, not just for the people who are illegally trying to rob you, but people who are trying to start litigation against you. And that's just a reality of the world we live in. Someone walks in and through no fault of your company, but no fault of the customer, they slip and fall on someone who spilled their drink on the floor a little bit ago. You're liable for that. And you don't want to have to pay that out of pocket. Certainly if you're just getting started, you don't have a ton of assets, you're getting your company off the ground, you can't pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lawsuit. Have that insurance in place from day one of when your operations are getting going. It'll be one of the most worthwhile things you can get involved in. And, it's not just, there's many types of insurance.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are some of the types?
Certainly. Yeah. There's commercial general liability insurance, which covers the, the slip and fall, the liability of the customers, that sort of thing. There's insurance we call EPLI, which deals with employment liability. And that's another thing too, is you're going to have employees. You're going to have to set up an HR department or have an HR person or an HR contact and deal with that sort of thing. That's something that my firm deals with on a daily basis. And, any good attorney you're going to hire who's involved in cannabis will be able to help you out with employment issues as well. But that's something you have to insure as well. And there's various other types of insurance depending on what type of business you're getting into, what jurisdiction you're in. But all of that can be handled by a good cannabis insurance broker. And I know Mito works with several who are very good. I met a number of them before. And make sure you get yourself a broker who knows the cannabis industry. There's going to be brokers out there who are going to tell you, oh yeah, I love the cannabis industry, but really they have no experience in it. They just want your money. So
yeah, and they're going to forget about things like crop insurance, product liability, and not just product, like people think product liability like fire damage. No, what happens if something in your product in a production run, there might be a line breaks, or you never know, somebody may get sick from something down the road through no fault of anything that you did, and it just was a really terrible coincidence that it happened. Crop insurance is the really big one that I know was not even available in the industry until about the middle, like 2014, 2015 is about when we started to see crop insurance, because there was a need.
Yeah, no, product liability actually is a really fantastic point to bring up for the purposes of insurance. If you sell a product that's manufactured by someone else, which is what you're going to do as a dispensary owner for the most part, unless you have your own manufacturing facility affiliated with your license, but you're going to be selling the products of someone else. And if something's wrong with that product, even though you just sold it, you didn't make it, you're involved in what we attorneys like to call the stream of commerce in a product liability suit. And you have liability just as much as that product manufacturer. And it's for someone who's not involved in litigation and who's getting introduced to the world of business, product liability is a very scary thing. And, knock on wood, we've been fairly fortunate in the industry. There's been a few notable cases. I think there's one out of Denver recently, but we've been fairly fortunate when it comes to the product liability world. But as the industry continues to grow, it's just a fact of the world we live in that the amount of litigation is going to increase. The number of cases are going to increase. And God forbid, the number of class actions might increase. And if you get roped into a class action case, you absolutely have to have insurance for that, because you don't want to pay an attorney to be involved in a case that could go on for years. You want to have protection for your business for liability exposure. You don't want to pay out settlements out of your business's account, or certainly out of your own pocket. So make sure you find a good cannabis insurance broker who's going to help you through all those various types of insurance, including crop insurance too. If you get into the cultivation world, that's extremely valuable, because crops fail. That's just it's been like that for hundreds of thousands of years, and it'll be like that in the future. Even though the technology we have in the cannabis cultivation industry is phenomenal, it's just the nature of the business, the world we live in, where crops fail. You want to have insurance. You don't want to be stuck with no cash flow for a year because of a failure.
Yep, that's the quickest, surefire way to run a business into the ground is forego insurance.
Yeah.
Caleb, we we had an insurance claim in 2014 for room for crop failure for 140,000. The insurance company didn't pay. So since then, we didn't work with that insurance company ever again. But 9 Point Strategies, another group that works with META, will also have a panel on the social equity deep dive. So we highly recommend Doug and his team.
Yep. And they understand cannabis, and they understand each facet of the industry that may require insurance. We're talking about things specific to the cannabis industry, but there are insurance and regulatory requirements just for a business, and that was what Prescott was talking about on the liability side. And the crop insurance for cannabis there's crop insurance for every other commodity crop in the country. So we're bringing things more in line with what is actually happening for other industries, which is just really showing the evolution.
Yeah, let's not forget, to Dimitri's point too, a little bit of shameless self-promotion here, but when you do pick an attorney, you want to have a big firm who's got capabilities just beyond the cannabis world. And the reason I bring that up is to what Dimitri said, where sometimes, you'll have a crop fail, you'll have someone slip and fall on your property, whatever. You go to make a claim, the insurance company says, sorry, there's no coverage. Here's our position on that. Good luck. You're on your own. And you want to have a firm who's got the ability to maybe have coverage attorneys on staff who can actually help you and go fight that insurance company. And, my firm's a national firm. We have over 200 attorneys nationwide. We have, I think, one of the best coverage departments in the entire country. And you want to have a firm that will help you with not just the getting up and running portion of it, but also the operations portion of it. And sometimes you have to fight insurance companies. Sometimes you have to have coverage people assist you on that. And that's certainly something we can help with.
Yep. All they have to do is say, that's not covered, that this is our position. So definitely. So, okay. So we've got security, we've covered insurance requirements. What are some of those others, like pre-opening things that are maybe not necessarily regulatory driven, but just as a business operator, what do I need to be thinking of?
Sure. Well, I think I'm going to start with maybe what was one of the biggest regulatory driven issues that we had to deal with is in the cannabis industry, and that's payment processing. Back in the dark ages, as we talked about earlier, it was strictly cash only. And the best part was, once you had all that cash, you had nowhere to put it because banks wouldn't accept it. Banks would you couldn't take more than $10,000 to a bank without having them fill out a report. And banks were almost the entire time, refusing to fill out these reports for cannabis companies. They smelled cannabis on your cash. They wouldn't take it.
That happened a couple of times.
Yeah, it's awful, but we're fortunate in that the payment processing industry has certainly evolved quite a bit in recent years. When I started out, like I said, it was cash only. That kind of evolved. There were various options on how to handle payments. There was prepaid gift cards were all the rage a couple of years ago. Cryptocurrency certainly made an appearance in the industry. There's no doubt about that. But now we're starting to see some traditional credit card processing companies get into the industry. We're starting to see, we have for a while, specialized smaller banks, specialized credit unions, state-run financial institutions. We got that out here in Nevada that are designed to handle cannabis transactions. And I'll tell you, if you're getting into the industry now, payment processing is 1,000 times easier than it was 10 years ago. Certainly, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Let's not forget, cannabis is still illegal on the federal level. It's still Schedule I drug, unfortunately. So there's issues you deal with when it comes to certainly on the financial side. But it's a perfect segue into the next thing that we have to handle, and that's accounting. You need a good accountant, and here's why. From day one, the dark ages, the IRS still wanted their portion of any money you made. And God, it was terrible. When you first started, you had to pay tax on every dollar that came in. You couldn't offset your expenses. You couldn't deduct anything. You had to pay taxes on everything. And the IRS didn't care if it was illegal on the federal level. They're getting their cut. And that remains the same today. And you're not just dealing with the federal level with taxes. I think even more importantly, in some ways, you're dealing with the state. The reason that a lot of these states, as we talked about at the beginning, are getting more involved in cannabis is because they're starting to find out it's a great source of revenue. So, you're going to pay taxes in Nevada. You're going to pay them at all levels, essentially. If you are in the cultivation business, you're going to pay an excise tax on every dollar for the product that you ship out to a manufacturer or to a dispensary. As a dispensary owner, you're going to pay taxes, and sometimes they're different taxes depending on whether it's medical or recreational, but you're going to pay taxes on, of course, every product that you sell to the consumer, and that's going to be on top of the general sales tax that each municipality has. You're going to pay special cannabis taxes, and you're going to have to keep books, and they're going to have to be perfect books in every way for every single sale that you have. And for the most part, state regulators are given access to those books anytime they want. So you have to make sure you have a very good accounting team working for you, an accounting team that is experienced in cannabis. If you take on investors, you're going to want the investors probably to have their own accounting team as well, because it can get tricky sometimes when you have joint licensing agreements, that sort of thing. You have to make sure that you have accountants, though, who are familiar with cannabis, who've done it for years, who aren't just getting into this because it's the new hot thing. Make sure you have people who know what they're doing. So it's imperative, though, because the regulation in the industry is like probably no other industry out there. In Nevada, the only thing comparable is probably gaming. And it's imperative that you stay squeaky clean, because I'll tell you what, you slip up one thing, you make one mistake when it comes to your books, you're done. They're pulling that license and they're not going to think twice of it. They're going to find any one of hundreds of other people who are willing to take that license off your hands for you and run a business and make a ton of money off of it.
Yep. So it's ultimately, I think the biggest takeaways from that are getting the right professional team that have the experience in the industry, because they understand those nuances. There was a big report that the IRS put out, or it was the Attorney General of the Treasury, related to the cannabis industry, and basically saying that the IRS was missing an opportunity to take even more money from Section 280E, that they felt that the operators were over deducting in the neighborhoods of, I think it was something like 50 or $60 billion that had been missed. So the IRS is going to go after, and they're going to get their cut. So that's one thing I can kind of leave you with here, is all of that prep and everything is do things the right way, get your right licenses when it comes to your taxes, and that's federal, that's sales taxes, and making sure that you're on time and that you ask the questions if you don't know. Don't ever make an assumption as a business owner. Ask the questions. There are no stupid questions. There are only stupid assumptions.
Well said. Well said. And I'll add one more thing to that too, is that, starting from the days of the Cole memorandum that Dimitri mentioned early on, it's imperative that you keep everything within the borders of the state. Don't go outside the state. The Department of Justice, through the various memorandums over the years, have said that we're not going to enforce restrictions on cannabis as a restricted Schedule I drug if you keep it within the state. And it sort of led to a very interesting beginning to anytime a state legalizes cannabis. Out in Nevada, you couldn't get seeds from outside the state. You couldn't get the specialized strains that I'll see in the dispensaries from outside the state. They just magically appeared one day in the state of Nevada. It was a fantastic thing, but it just goes to show, though, keep everything in the state, keep your money in the state, keep your suppliers in the state. Obviously, don't go buy cannabis from a cultivation company outside of the state. Everything stays within the state. That's how you keep the feds away from you. And that's my biggest worry as an attorney for cannabis and the cannabis industry, is keep the feds away from you.
And I'm muted. Gotta love the Zoom life. In your experience, Prescott, what is one of the most common or some common roadblocks that you've seen in that application process? So let's think of, like, they've gotten their lottery ball. From that point to opening, what are some common roadblocks that you see?
Yeah, unfortunately, the biggest one remains the local opposition to cannabis as a whole. It's going to hurt the children. What about the children? That sort of thing. And that really goes back to what we talked about before, is have the right team of experts on your side. Have a cannabis commercial real estate broker on your side who can certainly walk you through the process. For the most part, most most applications are going to succeed. There's going to be some opposition, I think, in some ways, no matter where you go, although that's going down, but it still happens. So know your area, know what you're getting into. A rural jurisdiction is a lot different than something in downtown Phoenix. There's no doubt about that. Tucson's going to be probably different than Phoenix as well. Flagstaff is different than Phoenix. Know where you're going, know your community, meet the people, do whatever you need to do to make sure you know what you're getting into, and avoid that local opposition. Because I think there's probably not a single thing that's blown up more dispensary applications than that. And it's unfortunate. And it's something that hopefully goes away as the years go on. But that's what we have to deal with now, quite frankly.
Yep. So I'll give you, it's a kind of a side note example, but I was trying to build a pool in our backyard and went to the state, and it took a year to get the permit because of some local opposition in the area that they didn't want, because we had to pull a fence down. So the neighbors didn't want the backhoe coming in that area. So they went and voiced their complaint at the hearing about it. And it was a back and forth. I mean, this is something as simple as a pool, and the neighbor didn't like it. Think about, for anybody that has had years and decades of socialist, like of propaganda, basically of continually hearing that same thing, and something that really speaks to their core, that they believe that. So just think about what you're going to be going up against.
Yeah, let's not forget too, these groups, like you said, they can be conditioned to think cannabis is a very evil thing, and their opposition a lot of times isn't going to just be cannabis is bad, we don't want the kids to see it, that sort of thing. These guys will hire attorneys sometimes to prevent cannabis operations from opening up, and they'll start to attack things like your parking plan, the traffic plan. Do you have enough parking spaces for the amount of people that are going to come? What are you going to do about foot traffic? What about public transportation? They'll take any weakness in your plan, in your business plan, in your zoning plan that's submitted, in your survey, and use that against you just to get what they want. And that's to stop you from opening. So again, make sure you have a good team who knows what they're doing to help you out with that.
Definitely.
And from a pragmatic standpoint, talk to me ahead of time on this, because depending on where you put your license after you've won, different dispensaries will stir up neighborhood groups to keep you from competing against them. So you definitely want to work with the attorneys and the zoning specialists who are familiar with some of these battles and some of these pits that could occur when you have certain neighborhoods and certain dispensaries working together to stop your progress. So it's just better to be aware that actually occurs and to try to mitigate it as much as possible.
Yeah, welcome to the business world, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, everything that we've talked about today is certainly not an effort to scare away the potential license holders for the social equity program. Because I can tell you, in my opinion, there's nothing more rewarding than working in a cannabis business. And I can tell you, some of my favorite clients are in the cannabis industry. Doing this kind of work and really being a trailblazer for the industry nationwide is just it's a very rewarding thing. It's obviously most of the dispensaries are very financially successful as well. We can't ignore that, but it's a fantastic industry to get involved in, and certainly has rewards to it.
Yep, I think today's been more of a just reality check on that. It's a big project. Starting a business, any type of business, is a big project. Cannabis, especially, given just the complexity of the regulations and all of those steps in the process, just make it that much more of a challenge to overcome. Is really a good way to look at it. So I'm sure that there's been some people out there that are thinking about, all right, I have a social equity license, and I get it in Arizona. Can I go to another state with my license? Like, does that give me the ability, like I want a franchise model? Like what can I do?
Yeah, it's, we've been asked that a lot, quite a bit. And I think the reason why is that in Nevada, when we started our medical program out here, we were the first state to offer reciprocity to other medical card holders throughout the country. And at the time, that was a pretty trailblazing thing. It's a little more common now, and certainly not as relevant anymore in light of recreational being legalized. But if you get a social equity license with the ability to operate a dispensary or other entity in Arizona, the simple answer is no, you cannot use that license in any other state. And that's largely because of every state's differing requirements, differing regulations. You have to jump through each state's state-specific set of hoops to get your license in that state. And of course, cannabis being illegal on the federal level means those regulations only apply to that particular state. So unfortunately, at this point in time, you cannot use that license anywhere else. But the good news is you're one of only 26 social equity license holders with a number of more traditional license holders in the state. You have a fantastic opportunity in the state of Arizona to run a successful business.
Yep. Yep. And I'm not surprised that you hear that. I mean, we hear a lot of news about MSOs, multi-state operators, and people think of just translation into the corporate world. So just very, very important that all of those MSOs hold licenses in every state that they're operating that are different and are not transferable across those state lines.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of brand names that we all know that we see in various states that we go to. But like you said, each that brand name being operated in each state goes through all the hoops that we discussed today through that particular state. There's licensing agreements, that sort of thing that allow it to operate, but everything remains state specific.
Yep. So let's say that somebody get that lucky ball drop and decide that that's not what I had in mind, or that it's too daunting of a task. Can they sell their licenses?
Well, there's sort of two parts to the answer to this question. I think the first part is it is daunting, no doubt about it. But as we talked about early on, the draft regulations, as I've seen them, requires that the social equity license holder be a 51% or more equity owner of whatever cannabis entity is set up. And that gives you a chance to potentially bring in an investor. Because I'll tell you what, if you're one of the 26 people, your phone's going to be ringing, I'm guessing, because people are going to want to get involved, want to help you out, want to be a part of what you're getting started. And for good reason, because you have, as we talked about before, you have a fantastic opportunity. So if you want to get someone involved, it's even more important to contact an attorney, because there's various regulations that govern how you bring in a partner or an investor into a cannabis entity. We start getting into things like licensing agreements or joint venture agreements. You're going to have to draw up an operating agreement. You're going to potentially sell shares or sell an interest in your company to another company, that sort of thing. And all of these things are it's hard to talk in generalities about this because everything's specific to your particular license, to your particular situation. But yes, you can absolutely get an investor on, have an attorney help you out who's done these sort of transactions before, and get someone on board. You can keep your at least 51% interest, but you can get an influx of cash or whatever you need from an investor to get your business up and running. Because to be honest, it's not a cheap process to go through. All those steps that we talked about, for the most part, cost money. You're going to have to pay a decent amount of money for insurance. You're going to have to pay for security. You're going to have to pay for the survey. You have to pay for the attorney to do all these things as well. So it's good to bring in an investor. That's certainly allowed for under the Nevada draft regulations. And the second part of that question is, can you just simply sell your license? And my understanding is there's nothing that precludes that in Arizona from you selling your license. That may change. That's something that has attracted a lot of press attention in recent days. And I don't know what's going to happen, quite frankly. I can tell people about the current state of the law, but I try not to predict what's going to happen to the law too much, because sometimes we never know what's going on behind the scenes. And I've been wrong more than once before about what's going to happen. But as it stands right now, that's where we're at.
Yep. And so it does. And I know that a big piece has to do with control and helping to ensure, because we've seen this in a lot of other states, of where they had a requirement on ownership, but then made it to where the person had no voting rights, and they really were just, they were a figurehead. There's no other way to put it, for another operator to basically just get another license. So that is one thing I know that the Department of Health Services is really trying to ensure that they avoid in Arizona, of giving that license holder of the person, making sure that benefit is going to the applicant to which the benefit is supposed to go to. So we shall see. Time shall tell.
Yep.
So we're getting close here to the end of our time. So we've got just a couple more questions for you. Certainly with your wealth of experience, and we really appreciate your time here today, Prescott, and seeing of just everything that's involved here. What is the hot tip? What would be your kind of what's your hot tip?
Know the regulations, and it's not a sexy tip by any stretch of the imagination, but know the regulations, know the current state of the regulations, because as we've seen, the draft regulations for the social equity program came out recently. They're already being changed. They're going to be changed more. There was a public comment period. They're going to be changed, and when you think they're done, they're going to be changed again. So know the regulations, and know an attorney who knows the regulations is probably the better tip for that. So that's the biggest thing, because you don't get a second chance at this program. That's the thing. You get one chance to get your application complete, comply with all the regulations. You don't want to blow it. It's just simply too valuable of an asset to miss out on simply because you didn't keep up with the regulations.
Yep, definitely. So with those regulations, do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how to either streamline that process? Can you streamline the process? Is there a way to mitigate the red tape, or is this just part of the industry?
Well, unfortunately, I think the way the industry is set up and the way the industry is going to be for a long time is you have to get through the red tape. The best thing you can do is have a good team on your side. And it's not just me, an attorney. It's not just a good law firm. Have the commercial real estate people on your side. Have the commercial insurance cannabis broker on your side. Get yourself a good team, because you're going to be stretched thin enough as it is that you can't do everything on your own. Find people who know what they're doing, who've been doing it for a long time, and use what those people have to offer. It's one of the best investments you can make in yourself and your company that's out there.
Definitely. And I'll add to that of trust your gut. You're going to have a lot of people reaching out to you. I think you hit on it of you get that lottery ball, you get the license, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to get in front of you, and trust your gut. You just got to trust your gut on whether this person is giving me the right feeling or whether they're rubbing me the wrong way, and trust it. You'll know throughout all of this of who's going to be that right team for you.
Yeah, that's fantastic, actually. And, that really brings up another point is, my point was, surround yourself with a good team on a professional level, but surround yourself with a good team on a personal level as well. Know your friends, trust your gut, rely on, life experience of family, that sort of thing. But like you said, always trust your gut, because you won the lottery in a literal and figurative sense, certainly by getting one of these licenses.
Yeah,
I love you. I love your optimism, Caleb. But if I can leave everybody with one thing, your gut might get confused because you might be hungry. Trust your attorney and pick up counsel that's bar certified, that is subject to a code of ethics, that's there to help you and protect you from yourself, from others, from the government. That's much better than your gut. And I have made that mistake. And I sincerely mean that from the bottom of my heart. If I could undo one of the biggest mistakes that I made in my life, was I trusted my friend, and my gut told me that he was a good guy, but I should have listened to counsel.
In some ways, that's what I get paid for, Dimitri, is to maybe tell some of my clients why their gut's wrong. And how I explain it to them, I guess, is how I keep clients. But
this has been a great webinar, because people have gotten to know you a little bit better, and hopefully, as they see this, they'll know what kind of person that they're dealing with. Somebody who's willing to spend an hour of their day getting them some preliminary information, and reach out to you. And actually, should be from the beginning formations of LLCs and partnerships, right from the onset and through the application process. I'm advising people to find somebody like yourself, give them $5,000 retainer, and just let that relationship develop. And cost you $1,000, $2,000 for the preliminary documents, but it's very important to have that person with you.
Yeah, certainly. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the time that you've given me to, talk to those people out there who are going to try to get the social equity license. It's a fantastic program. I'm certainly happy to assist in any way possible. Really what's a very well-intentioned and well-meaning program in Arizona. So certainly glad to be a part of it and appreciate the time.
Yep, thank you very much. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap today. So this was another one of Mita's deep dive sessions brought to us by 420 Collections. 420 Collections has 420 skincare and 420 medibles that can be found in dispensaries throughout Arizona. So please go and check them out. They are an amazing sponsor, an amazing part of Mita that are allowing us to have these deep dive sessions. So we really appreciate them. We appreciate you, Prescott, for coming in and giving your time and the wealth of information. And until next time, just trust your gut.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you, guys.